Hello and welcome back to the Rope Access and Climbing Podcast, YouTube edition. I'm your host, Mikey Stevenson, and today I'm going to be starting a new series called Acceptable Unacceptable. If this is your first time here, please make sure to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Step into your harness and get ready for a podcast about the vertical world. All right, well, let's dive into today's episode. So, what I'm going to be starting here is a series called Acceptable or Unacceptable. I gave this a little test run there on Facebook, so some of you may already be familiar with it. But what it is here is I'm going to post a photo or a video of a different rigging scenario and just kind of break it down and find out if it's acceptable or if it's not acceptable. The big difference here is that we have to understand that there is 1,001 ways to do everything that we do in our industries. Also, keep in mind that there's going to be a collective amount of information coming in from different industries. So there's going to be some fire prevention stuff, so NFPA stuff. There's going to be a lot of rope access stuff, and even a little bit of mountaineering based stuff there as well. So this is going to be a collective conversation, and that's my goal. So stay tuned. All right, well, let's kick off the episode here. So first scenario I have here is a Y-hang rigged with bunny ears, vertical bolts here. So what do we have? So we're going to break this down from start to finish. All right, so we have two bolts bolted into whatever structure you have. Make sure that they're nice and tight and stuff. And then we have two connectors. We have a rope here tied into bunny ears and giving us two working ropes at the bottom. All right, so big question here as the whole concept is it acceptable or is it not acceptable? And the reality here in this certain situation, this is not acceptable. All right. In the rope access industry, we need to make sure that we have redundancy all the way from the anchorage to the connections on our harnesses. And in this case, we only have one alpine butterfly knot. And so therefore, it is not acceptable. To make this acceptable, you would have required to double this up and have two bunny ears. All right. Next up here is a Y-hang. So here I have on the left-hand side two figure eights on a bite. In the middle, we have a collective alpine butterfly. And then as you can see, two strands are heading up to the right-hand side bolts. So, our bolts there again, this could also be slings. So if you're in the industrial industry, you may be using slings for this. But in this case, I have bolts. Now, is this acceptable or unacceptable? The answer here is this is acceptable. And a lot of people are going to be like, oh, well, I don't really know. It's only one alpine knot. You just said one knot is 1 point. And yes, I did say that. But you got to keep in mind here that in this circumstance, I have two independent ropes feeding into the one alpine butterfly. And then I have two strands coming out on the other end of it. All right. Why would someone want to rig something up like this? There's a couple different reasons. I'm going to give you kind of two primary reasons. The first one is additional safety. Okay, so in a Y-hang, if you just tie it independently, if one line fails, then you still have that out of control swing potential. In this situation, if any one leg fails, you have one centralized focal point, and that'll eliminate any potential out of control swing in the system. Another great reason why to rig something up like this is deflection. So because we are tying both the ropes together, when I load the knot as one, then I'm pulling on all the independent legs. So cutting down on the amount of deflection. This is something that a lot of people don't really consider, but especially where you have situations where you may have to get up really high on that Y-hang or that tension line. While adding more strands, you don't have the potential of pulling out all that stretch. So more strands reduces deflection. Um, and also something about this, keep in mind the angle. Uh, this is rigged in at about 105 degrees. So our critical angle is 120 degrees. Our optimal angle is anything less than 90 degrees. So this falls right into the middle. All right, so finally we have this scenario here. It's a pull through setup. So an individual was sending up, making a bolt ladder on the way up, and got to the end of the day, whatever the case is, wanted to get out of there pretty quick. So just rig this up. We have two knots. We have an overhand knot on the top, alpine butterfly knot at the bottom. Sorry, I should have separated it a little bit better when I took the photo, just so you can see that it was an alpine butterfly. So is this acceptable or is this not acceptable? And the answer here is yes, it is acceptable. It's definitely not what a lot of people have been trained. Fair. And you may have never seen a pull through done like this before, both in the vertical orientation as well with different knots. Also, you may not have ever seen a pull through rigged up through itself. So kind of dive into those a little bit here. So first thing I'm going to dive in here is the vertical orientation. It really doesn't matter if they're horizontal or vertical. Sometimes this is the scenario you're given. Obviously, to make life a lot easier, it would be nice to have them horizontal to each other, but it's not bad. In this event, though, if you are doing this or if you've seen this, the big key importance here is that you attach your descent device to the lower knot and you have your backup to the upper knot. And the reason for that is obviously you want to keep your backup as high as possible. Once you descend down, so your backup is below the lower anchor point, it doesn't matter anymore. Quite honestly. Next point here is the nylon on nylon or the rope on rope conversation. Not a problem here at all because we're not creating a sawing action. Once you put your descent device on the bottom bolt rope, it's fixed. It's a statically loaded system. It's not sawing. It's not scraping, anything like that. Once it's loaded, it's loaded. You may get a little bounce, but it's not going to be enough to cause any catastrophic problems. And same thing with the top. In an event of a fall, yes, it will heat up. It will potentially singe the rope a little bit, but it's definitely not something to be to be worried about. Okay. And then next up would be the overhand knot. So yes, it's not something that you're trained, but it doesn't make it wrong. There's more gray in rope access industry than there is black and white. The majority of stuff that we do is right, not wrong. And keep in mind that always the difference between right and wrong is the difference between safe or not safe. It may not be the way that you've been trained. It may not be the way that you prefer. It may not be the, good, better, best practice. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're trying to get to the meat and potatoes of is it safe or not safe? And yes, we use overhand knots in rope access. Lots of people still use overhand knots on their cow's tails. It is an acceptable knot in the rope access industry. But we understand with the overhand knot, we have a massive reduction of strength. It doesn't stay tight in a lot of cases. It, loosens itself off. And, at the end of the day, if you do tighten it, it's almost virtually impossible to untie it. So there's a lot of reasons why we don't like to use the overhand knot, but it is still an acceptable knot. And then one other thing that popped up on this conversation was the knots pulling through the bolts here. Very unlikely in that event, but yeah, it's not going to be a big deal. Okay. And why couldn't we just put carabiners here? Okay, that would be just the end all be all easy answer. It would take away a lot of questions. And great question, great points, and stuff like that. But the reality here is anything less than about 6 inches in diameter on a pipe or a tube, you end up potentially cross-loading a carabiner. So in this event, we're literally dealing with a 12 millimeter stainless steel wrap ring. So a carabiner, if it did end up the knot getting pulled through, then you'd be putting some weird loading on that carabiner, and we definitely want to avoid that. So that's really the big meat and potatoes of why this is acceptable. There's no perfect answer in rope access for a lot of things, so keep that in mind. All right, well, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some useful information out of this. And like I said, this is going to be a series of videos. So plenty more to come. All right. There's so much stuff out there that we can talk about when it comes to different rigging scenarios. And my job here today is to dive into them, break them down, and find out if they're safe or not safe. All right. So also keep in mind that, as you can see, my environment is drastically different from what you're used to seeing, and I apologize for that, but I am away in Fort McMurray working currently, so you're going to be seeing this kind of backdrop for a little while. So until next time, make sure to like, subscribe, comment if you have any questions, and I will see you on the next one.